Welcome back to the Done Deal Show, live with Ben Jacobs. Lots to go through today. The Guehi deal advancing. We're taking a look at Chelsea in their pursuit of defenders. A bit of an overall stop at Man United. The new permanent manager talk. Could there be any signings? Plus, Tammy Abraham returning to the Premier League. Callum Wilson, Paquetá, and more to come. So sit down, grab a cup of tea, coffee, glass of water. And Ben, great to have you back on the show. Happy New Year. We haven't actually spoken since the New Year as well, but it feels like an eternity ago. How are you?
Yeah, I was discussing the other day what the cutoff is when you're still allowed to say Happy New Year. I'm like 2 weeks, but I'll let it slide.
Yeah, pretty much. It's just over 2 weeks. We haven't seen each other. So you're the last one I'm wishing a Happy New Year to. Everybody else can swivel. But lots to go through today. And I suppose the first big thing maybe to start with is the news that's just broke and the report that Manchester City are advancing on Marc Guehi.
Yeah, so this was a story that I broke a couple of days ago. And when at the time we released it, we made it really clear that the steps to get Marc Guehi, if Manchester City are to concede, are 1, get player buy-in, then 2, start the formal club-to-club negotiations. And that's simply because Palace are open to a sale. Guehi has always needed a little bit of convincing. And Man City have always been intent on trying because Josko Gvardiol and John Stones and Ruben Diaz are all injured. So in the last 12 to 24 hours, City have been pitching to the player to find out basically if he's going to change his perspective, because for many weeks now, Guehi's been indicating that he might just wait until summer and then take his pick of clubs as a free transfer after the 2026 World Cup. What changed is Manchester City have urgency, and now they want to make their pitch immediately and try and jump ahead of the market. Liverpool and Arsenal more inclined to do the deal in the summer. Chelsea discussed Guehi over the summer, but chose not to move. They might be in the market for another defender in January, but we don't yet have an indication they're going to enter the race specifically for Marc Guehi. But remember, Chelsea were out the race for Antoine Semenyo until about 48 hours before we joined Manchester City, and then they did make an exploratory call. But at the moment, it's all Man City. And if they get a green light from Marc Guehi and they have to compensate him versus him waiting and as a free agent getting a really good financial package, and should he say yes, I want to go mid-season, then the club-to-club with Palace is not hard in the sense they're not going to block it like they did over the summer. They're not even necessarily going to not sanction it and then wait and find a replacement. And if it falls through, pull the plug at the 11th hour. What they will do is overcharge, in inverted commas, comparative to the time left on the contract, because they know that they'll have to go into the market and ultimately themselves maybe overpaid to bring in a defender. But if the number is 35 million or more, so not lower but higher or equal to what Liverpool agreed over the summer, then Palace are confident that they won't necessarily have to scramble because there will be targets that they can get by spending at least a large portion of that number. So the long and short of it is, if Guehi says yes in the next 24 to 48 hours, Man City are expected to place a formal bid. Palace's retort is going to be, we want the same or more than the 35 million that Liverpool agreed over the summer. If City pay a bit above the odds, not because it's bad value, but I mean specifically in relation to what's left on his contract, then it is likely that a club-to-club agreement will be reached on those terms. So Guehi's future one to watch, because he could still move in the final few days of the window, even though at the beginning of January, the player's intent was to be a free transfer and go in the summer.
What will this look like from a signing on fee perspective and a salary point of view? As we all know, typically speaking, if you sign as a free transfer, it isn't really free for the club that gets you, because there's normally a big signing on fee and often hugely increased salary. Are City making sort of a concession there in terms of still giving the player a big signing on fee and large wages, because the summer would typically see that increase?
Well, I think at this stage, we're not quite so advanced that they're getting into the nitty gritty of sign-on fees. But generally speaking, you can offer a sign-on fee and the player side will naturally say it would have been a certain higher number in the summer. And we wait and see whether Manchester City match that. More importantly, I think to Marc Guehi is the football pitch at this stage, because he wants to understand what City going to be like when everyone comes back. It's one thing saying there's urgency to get him now. It's another thing compared to other projects outlining how much game time he's going to get and where the competition will lie comparative to some other clubs. For example, if you look at Liverpool, they'll be saying summer, Virgil van Dijk, come summer, 1 year left. And I think that will be that after the contract runs down. It would be very unlikely, given Van Dijk's wage and age, that he'd get another extension. So you've got a free spot for a left-sided centre-back, and Ibrahima Konate at the moment hasn't signed a new deal. So Liverpool are able to go to Guehi and say, we wanted you last summer, and if you wait until next summer, you'll either play on the right or the left, and you're going to get a lot of game time. And even if both Konate and Van Dijk stay, by summer 2027, a spot kind of opens up. So there's a clear pathway there, whereas Man City would have to outline what happens when Vardiel and Diaz and Stones comes back, and Husinov could develop and become a player. And all of these things will be factors as well. So it's the football pitch at the moment, I'm told. City are prepared to offer a top 5 to 7 earner type wage by Premier League standards. And Marc Guehi's financial demands are not unreasonable, as you can imagine, given his age and his talent and his standing at Crystal Palace and the fact that he's the captain of that football club. If he moves, he wants to earn a high Premier League wage and be a top 5 to 7 earner at a big 6 club based on their finances. And City, as with Semenya, would be prepared to match that. So I'm not so sure that the finances will be the big issue here. For me, speaking to sources in the last few hours, it's about, can Man City convince Marc Guehi on the long term, not just now and between the summer? And can they convince Marc Guehi it's worth moving now? Because that instability, even though it's also very exciting for him, could have an impact as he builds up to the 2026 World Cup. His selection is, of course, not in doubt. But if he moves and it doesn't work, if he switches and other players come back, and by April, May, he's not playing as often, then you've got Levi Colwill, who will be returning from injury in and around the April mark. Harry Maguire might get late game time or some more opportunities under Michael Carrick. And before you know it, Thomas Tuchel's got a decision to make as to who he wants to start. So these are all considerations, and it's a fluid situation. But my expectation is, if Marc Guehi gives the green light, then there will be an imminent bid to Crystal Palace.
Viewers, give us your views, your opinions in that comment section below. The deal is advancing, and definitely one to keep an eye on. Talking of defenders, I saw some posts from yourself yesterday about the summer, Chelsea looking at Van Dijk, and there does appear to be a desire for Chelsea to bolster their defensive ranks. What's the latest you can let our Chelsea fans know in connection to that?
Yeah, so Enzo Maresca wanted a defender when Levi Colwill got injured, but Chelsea decided to back those that they had and try not to stifle the pathway of Josh Achimpong, who's on the radar of Manchester City and Bayern Munich, and Tosin and Benoit Badiashile and Wesley Fofana, who returned to fitness, Colwill when he comes back. There's a lot of options and pairings there, but we know that Maresca said publicly before he left he wanted another defender. Chelsea decided no. Now, they haven't entirely changed their minds, but they are prepared to support new manager Liam Rosenior if the right target presents itself. And I think Chelsea's mantra in the final 2 weeks of this window is the same as Manchester United's, that if a summer target becomes genuinely available at value now, they'll move. And that's why they're exploring the market. And if they have to wait until the summer, so be it. So Chelsea are determining, is there either a market opportunity or a long-term profile that they can bring forwards into January, when the original plan for a new defender was always summer. And then they have to wait maybe a few more days to get that feedback from Liam Rosenior. Because if it's just a case of cover Colwill out, then they'll sign a centre-back predominant. But if Liam Rosenior says Jorel Hato can step up on the left-hand side and also play left-back, and Reece James is going to be 50% a midfielder, then maybe Chelsea want a right-sided centre-back that can also play right-back. If he turns around and says there's several players that can cover at right-back, Malo Gusto, Josh Achimpong, and Reece James as a full-back, they might just go for an out-and-out centre-back. And then I think the profile will be someone that's equally as comfortable on the right or on the left. And that's where we don't yet have full clarity as to who the targets are. A youngster like Jeremy Jacquet is definitely one name that Chelsea have been scouting. Wolfsburg are the club that have made the bid for Charlie Cresswell, but Chelsea have been tracking his progress for a little bit as well. But scouting doesn't always mean a great deal. So let's wait and see what direction they go in. And then the reason why I'd mentioned in my report yesterday names like Marcus Senese, who's having an excellent season with Bournemouth, or Virgil van Dijk, is not because they're active now. It was context around what Chelsea were thinking over the summer. So Bournemouth have had no approach from Chelsea, at least as of now, for Senese. And with Virgil van Dijk, I think a lot of social media grabbed that and thought it was a now thing, but it wasn't. The report was about how in March, before Van Dijk had committed to a new 2-year deal, Chelsea made a call to understand, is anything possible here out of pure opportunism? And they learned very quickly Van Dijk was only going to do one thing, extend at Liverpool, so nothing came of it. But it just shows you that occasionally, despite how the model gets built, Chelsea are prepared under the right circumstances to depart from their youth-led model.
Absolutely. And another sort of update we saw yesterday, I think this was from you, and if I'm doing you a disservice, Ben, I'm sorry, regarding targeting a midfield player. So Adam Wharton's name has been mentioned, Mainoo's name has been mentioned. Is this something that Chelsea could explore this January, or is that more of a summer 26 target and opportunity for the club?
Yeah, Chelsea want a midfielder in the summer, and that's partly to kind of alleviate the burden on the likes of Moises Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez, coupled with the fact that Romeo Lavia has obviously had a horrible period of on-off injury. And we wait and see in the summer, for example, whether Darius Sugo stays or if he's loaned out somewhere. I know the Spanish club Levante are one of his suitors, but there's room for one more midfielder from Chelsea's perspective. And they have a few targets. Kobbie Mainoo, historical. They've not made any kind of January approach. And we know that Manchester United are probably going to be even more reticent to let him go now, because they'll have to wait and see what the new permanent manager's perspective is. And that's why it's looking increasingly unlikely that Kobbie Mainoo will be loaned out to Napoli as well mid-season. But Chelsea certainly appreciate the player. Elliot Anderson is the one, though, that I keep hearing. Adam Wharton has also been on Chelsea's radar too. But you'd sort of expect that from any big club. I think it would be more alarming if most of the big six were not looking at these kind of players, because they're all outstanding. Most of them are young and they're all Premier League proven. And the vast majority have had excellent seasons so far. It's probably only Carlos Baleba whose form has dipped a little bit comparative to last season. So Chelsea and Elliot Anderson, but Man City and Man United both expected to be there as well. And the other thing with Elliot Anderson is, if Nottingham Forest, for example, went down, a bit like West Ham or Wolves with some of their players, maybe suitors will feel that the value will drop. Forest may dispute that, but it's kind of interesting because we heard 3 weeks ago, definitively, apparently, and I respect other reporting, of course, but the number was 120. And then a week later, it was 100. And then last week, it's 80 to 100. So it just shows you that the market, because the reporting isn't always wrong, as a consequence of the fact that several clubs that are looking at Anderson could all have a completely different perspective. Some could be like, it's impossible. Some could be thinking if Forest go up back into some kind of European contention, then the price is going to be astronomical, or maybe even the player wants to stay. And some will feel at the opposite extreme. If Nottingham Forest go down, the price could be diminished as well.
Yeah.
But when different clubs are thinking it's anywhere on a sliding scale between 80 million and 120 million, that is an astonishing discrepancy. And it just shows you that until the market settles, and so does Forest's season, clubs like Chelsea, Man City and Man United will be waiting, because they know if they move too early ahead of the summer, they might get overcharged or they might run into a brick wall. But obviously at the end of the season, if Nottingham Forest have got no European football or they were to go down, it could be a completely different story. So Elliot Anderson is going to be one to watch, but I'm told that he's not agitating for a move. He's very happy with his form at Nottingham Forest. Nothing is expected to be possible in January, as I've always reported, because Forest have got all the cards right now. And of course, he'll want to get the World Cup out the way as well. So it is going to be one to watch over the summer. We're going to see a bit of a mad movement of midfielders. But for now, it's relatively quiet on the Elliot Anderson front.
Any questions you've got, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you're leaving your comments below in the live chat or in our comments section. Get that like button hit for us as well and share this across your social media platforms. We're going to talk some Arsenal. We're going to talk some Manchester United as well on the show. But a couple of stories have been exclusive to yourself in recent days involving... obviously, there's Tammy Abraham potentially returning to the Premier League, Callum Wilson, and the situation at West Ham. For our viewers that have an interest in those stories and whether that's their team or not, what's the latest on those incomings and outgoings?
So Tammy Abraham could leave in the coming week or two. And naturally, Villa had some conversations with Roma when Daniel Mallion moved. Some confusion on that deal, by the way, because Roma announced it as a loan with a buy option. Aston Villa said it's for an undisclosed fee. And the reason why is it's actually a conditional obligation. In other words, it starts as a buy option, but is very easily, I'm told anyway, and quickly triggered. So effectively, it's a buy clause that becomes an obligation. And Villa think it's so much of a slam dunk to be a permanent deal that they're referring to it as an undisclosed fee somewhere in the region of £25 million, whereas Roma are playing it a bit safer because technically and legally it's a buy option now, but it will very quickly, when the conditions are triggered, usually just based on a handful of appearances or cumulative minutes, become an obligation. And during that negotiation, Villa were able to understand what Roma are looking for Tammy Abraham. And my understanding is that Tammy Abraham has had approaches from several clubs, including multiple teams in England and also Saudi Arabia and obviously Besiktas, who have an intent to try and keep the player at the club. Now, what complicates the Tammy Abraham deal, even though Villa are quite optimistic, is you've got two negotiations. The first is a smooth one, agreeing a price with Roma, and Roma will basically sell for the same conditional obligation that Besiktas have already got. So around £11 million, or certainly south of £15 million. But because Besiktas have got the conditional obligation, there's no break clause allowing Roma just to pull him back and then sell him on to Aston Villa. So Besiktas, Villa and Roma have to find a solution if the Turkish club want to play ball. And all signs are that Abraham wants to return to England. And as a consequence, Villa are now growing in confidence that they can get this one over the line. But it's not a typical deal because there's 3, not 2 clubs involved. And then with Callum Wilson, also not the usual kind of January deal that you see, because Celtic and Saudi clubs, including Al Shabab, are interested, as I broke yesterday, but they don't really want to go to West Ham and offer anything or do a straight deal. So concurrent to their interest, predominantly exploring what Wilson's wage may be and where his appetite lies. Is it to go to Scotland or to Saudi Arabia, or are there other opportunities? Leicester City, for example, made a call. Burnley are believed to be in the mix as well. So all of these clubs are first trying to get what would Wilson actually be asking for, because his wage as it stands is relatively high. And then at the same time, they're delaying making any offers because their hope and their intel, to be fair, it's not just a hunch. They're obviously speaking to the Wilson side and to West Ham. And the feeling is that whether now or in the coming days, or it could even extend outside of the window because free agency allows for it, West Ham and Wilson are trying to terminate. So naturally, if you're a Celtic or even a Saudi club like Al Shabab, who don't have the kind of PIF budget, it's more beneficial for them to wait for West Ham and Wilson to terminate than to approach Wilson as a free agent. Whereas if a nominal fee is required to West Ham United and Wilson's wages are still high, that presents extra layers of complication that might put certain clubs off. So that's where we're at with Callum Wilson at the moment. But the expectation is one way or the other this winter, he will end up leaving West Ham United because Tati, Castellanos and Pablo have both arrived.
Yes, I see that. I mean, obviously the Paquetá news as well, sort of, I wouldn't say it shocked people because he's been on the cards for a few years that he would go. City were interested, but a return to Brazil, maybe not what people were expecting with Paquetá.
Yeah, I mean, the Paquetá situation is relatively predictable because even when he was charged and subsequently cleared of spot fixing, it was always Flamengo there. And Paquetá had said very clearly, even 6 months ago, he wants to move to Brazil. So now it's being billed like Paquetá's kind of driving a move. West Ham don't want to sell, and he's jumping ship when they're ultimately in a relegation battle. And at face value, I can see how West Ham fans might interpret it that way. But don't forget one key point, that in the summer, Paquetá said to Flamengo, I'd feel bad about leaving West Ham because they were so supportive to me now, and I'll reconsider it at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of the Brazilian season. And as a result, Paquetá's perspective is very much, he's already been loyal to West Ham and stayed longer than he wanted to, whereas West Ham would prefer it that he stays until the end of the season. And finances will not be an issue here, by the way. So it is true technically that a 40 million euros package bid has been rejected by Flamengo, but I wouldn't really interpret that in financial terms, because my understanding is the bid was rejected because West Ham want to keep the player. But if they change their mind or find a solution with Flamengo, the Brazilian club will basically offer the same thing, maybe slightly improved, perhaps a different structure, but basically 40 odd million euros is okay for West Ham, providing they decide to let the player go, as opposed to we want so much more money and the offer is not competitive. So this is why Flamengo are relatively confident, because if Paquetá continues to insist he wants to go now, and from West Ham's point of view, the finances are okay, then maybe the Brazilian club feel it's only going to end one way. As of yesterday, what happened is West Ham countered, which shows you the door is not entirely slammed shut. And they went to Flamengo and they said, you've got 4 different options here. Number one is you raise your offer significantly, which was gamesmanship, because as I've already noted, the finances are okay. Number 2 is you do the deal around 40 million euros now, but you loan the player back until the end of the season so he can fight and keep us up. And then you can basically have him in late May. Number 3 is that we put everything on hold and we revisit somewhere around the late February or early March period, because the Brazilian window doesn't shut on February the 2nd. It closes in March. So West Ham buy a little bit more time. Or number 4, if you don't like any of those options, then you just walk away and the player's not for sale. And Flamengo have slept on that information and are expected to come back today and say, we're not going to do the loan and we will increase the offer slightly, but we want the player right now. And their hope is basically that Paquetá goes on strike. But let's see whether that happens, because even though he's got a minor back injury, he turned up yesterday with the group. He was part of all of the plans. He certainly didn't do an Alexander Isak and refused to train or anything like that. So today, I'm told, is a really important day in the Lucas Paquetá saga. But Flamengo, for their part, remain convinced that there is a deal to be done.
Great update there on the Paquetá situation. Give us your views, opinions. Can't wait to see what you guys have got to say in that comment section below. On Manchester United, very unlikely there's going to be new signings this month. I think that's been very widely reported by the majority of journalists, including yourself. Michael Carrick now in as the next manager. And I suppose what a lot of United fans are concerned about, intrigued about, asking questions on is, when does the work for the new permanent manager begin? And could there be a signing this January if an opportunity arises? What's your latest understandings regarding the constant sagas at Old Trafford?
So it's not unthinkable that Manchester United do a surprise late bit of January business, even though all signs point towards a quiet month, no panic buying, and then putting a lot of their budget and energy towards summer targets. And as we've said countless times on this show, so I won't cover old ground, midfield, 2 elite starters expected to come in. They need to clarify Bruno Fernandes's future. He's going nowhere, by the way, this winter. Casemiro's contract winding down. Only reduced terms will keep him at the football club. And obviously, there's still a bit of a question mark over the heads of both Kobbie Mainoo and Manuel Ugarte. So there's a lot to do. And you can understand why Manchester United, with no new manager, not knowing the direction of travel yet there, and not knowing the clarity over the existing midfielders that I mentioned, definitively anyway, wouldn't want to necessarily add somebody recklessly now in midfield in particular, only to find that over the summer, things align in ways and they regret not waiting and being patient and waiting and see how everything falls and pans out with the players that they've got. And also being informed by, to an extent, what the new manager thinks. All of that said, there is one secret midfielder that Manchester United held talks with in the last 24 hours. And hopefully I'll be able to report a few more details in the coming days. But it's just an indication that they're not exactly saying Happy New Year, shutting up shop. We'll speak to you after the window closes. They are in talks with at least one midfielder for a loan on a short-term deal. Whether or not it develops, let's see. I'm not yet in a position where I can divulge the name, but what I can tell you is that the midfielder has Premier League experience.
To let you know, there's no one watching, so you can just tell me privately, no one's here.
I'll tell you straight after we go off air.
Ooh,
but anyways, the midfielder
okay.
who would only be available on a loan, and it would be until the end of the season, relatively economical. They've got Premier League experience. They're currently playing outside of England. And that, at this stage, is all I can report. And it may not even develop. So obviously social media will take it completely out of context and say Ben Jacobs says Manchester United in advanced negotiations to sign a secret midfielder with Premier League experience. Everybody get excited. We're not there yet. All they've done is make an inquiry, but it shows you that they're not categorically discounting backing Michael Carrick, much like his own role, with something between now and the end of the season. But let's see if it develops. It would not stagger anyone if they do nothing, but they're definitely still going to use this window time to explore opportunities, particularly, I'm told, in central midfield.
Yeah, listen, I hope that's true, and I can't wait to find out. And you know me, mum's always the word on these things.
By the way, the name I'm referencing is not Ruben Neves, despite the fact that the chat says so. Of course, Manchester United have discovered Neves, but you may note I said the players in Europe, not in Saudi Arabia. And obviously Neves is a really interesting one, but Al Hilal, as I exclusively revealed, right when Neves was being linked with Man United and other clubs, made a brand new contract offer. So Neves has now got 3 options. He either just goes after the World Cup, he signs a lucrative new deal, or potentially we might get a late window twist. And yeah, it's true. Manchester United, much like João Gomez, have discussed Neves as well, but they've not made an approach or a bid at this stage. And I'm fascinated to see how that one plays out, simply because Neves, I think, was originally intent on leaving before the World Cup if the right offer presented itself.
Came in, yeah.
But due to the wage, nothing really materialized that he fancied in the late December or when the window opened early January period. And now I think Al Hilal are actually growing in some confidence that he might stay. So let's see how that one develops. It's a fluid situation because Neves hasn't answered Al Hilal in their latest contract proposal yet. And there are still some clubs in Europe that are considering an opportunity, but the overall financial outlay of that one doesn't really make a lot of sense to several top clubs because of his wage in Saudi Arabia.
Makes great sense. Viewers, like, share, and subscribe. And what's the latest in relation to the new manager pursuit? Because Carrick's in, Holland's in, the coaching staff are in now for the rest of the season. But there's a lot of names that are being pushed about. We're seeing De Zerbi, Tuchel, Luis Enrique, Ancelotti, just to name a few. The likes of Areola and Grasner seem to be fading maybe a little bit, and I'm only going by the reports that are out there. Maybe that's connected to a recent run of form. And you and I are both old enough to remember the times where Owen Coyle was doing well and he was going to become the new Arsenal boss. I remember when Martin O'Neill was definitely replacing Fergie when he retired. So we've seen that many times in the past where a manager having a really good run, and then when the form dips, the hype goes away. But when When would Man United fans expect to hear? Would it be the end of the season, or do you think there could be a situation where we get to March and the new manager is announced and we know who it's going to be?
Yeah, the candidate will determine the timing. So I'd focus less on the timing, because if it was a Thomas Tuchel or obviously a Carlo Ancelotti, even though he's new to the Brazil job, or Maurizio Pochettino, who formed part of the original process, they're all World Cup managers, and they're not going to want it announced that they're leaving their countries before the World Cup starts.
Yes.
Whereas other names that are more available in the market, you might be able to strike an agreement with a little bit earlier. So the process is only just starting as of now. And I'm led to believe that Michael Carrick is aware he doesn't have the ability to earn the job permanently, and something absolutely incredible would have to change to alter Man United's perspective, like practically winning every single game. But the challenge for Carrick, if he wanted the job permanently, and it would have been the same for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, is Man United just don't have competitions to change the hierarchy's perspective. If they were in Champions League, still FA Cup, a League Cup semi-final, and top four in the Premier League, and then Carrick came in and won 2 trophies and got Champions League football, of course he would stand a chance. But Manchester United's best case scenario this season is top 4 or top 5 finish, and getting Champions League is the aim anyway, and it was the aim for Ruben Amorim. So if Michael Carrick halfway through the season gets that, it won't necessarily be enough evidence to make him a candidate. The names I'm hearing at the moment that are definitely on the shortlist, even though there's been no outreach, are Roberto De Zerbi and Thomas Tuchel. And then Oliver Glasner is actually expected to also make the kind of initial stages of the process. Mm-hmm. But I think with Glasner, when it was earlier in Ruben Amorim's season, and he was adamant the system isn't going to change and the system isn't the problem, and Man United sources were even briefing, yeah, we don't mind this back three, then of course if they made a change, especially mid-season, Glasner was quite an obvious choice, because he could have come in and picked up Ruben Amorim's work and continued with a back three. But it very well may be that by the time we get to the summer, Man United play a different system to Oliver Glasner, and therefore the kind of manager that they hire may be more about picking up the work done by Michael Carrick. And that's what I think they like about the appointment of Carrick, plus the experience of Steve Holland, and of course, Jonathan Woodgate coming in too, that them plus the football department can shape a kind of identity that's, with respect to Ruben Amorim, because he is still a top coach, easier on the eye, more aggressive and front foot. Yeah. And then they'll use that practical foundation to say to whoever they bring in, that's the style, that's the philosophy, this is the so-called Man United DNA, whereas Glasner and style may be a bit more similar to Ruben Amorim. So I'm hearing a lot about De Zerbi and Thomas Tuchel. A lot of people asking me about Gareth Southgate, because of course Steve Holland, his former assistant, has come in. I'm told that's not a clue, that's not a Trojan horse way of laying the foundations for Gareth Southgate. We know that Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos like Gareth Southgate, but it's also true that Southgate said repeatedly he hasn't even decided yet if he's going to return to any club or international management role, and there hasn't been an approach. So the sort of conspiracy theorists think that they've gone to Southgate, they've brought in Steve Holland, and then Southgate's just going to wait and see what kind of recon Steve Holland does before deciding if he wants the job. None of that's true to my understanding. There's been no approach as of today to Gareth Southgate, but Jim Ratcliffe does rate him as a coach. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But the process basically hasn't started. So we're going to have to be a bit patient in terms of Man United's direction of travel.
Yeah, I understand. I think what you said about Michael Carrick is really, really important, because I was on the United stand last night. No, I haven't said it I said it on my show last night. I'm going to be saying it on the United stand later. There is a world for me where Michael Carrick would deserve to keep his job, but it's exactly what you have just said there. It would have to be astronomically good in the sense of winning, for me, 70-75% of the games, but not just winning them. We'd have to look brilliant in those games where you're going, wow, there's balance. We're not being overrun. We look really good. We're playing well, performing well. Then I think you have to look at it and say, Well, that's 4 or 5 months of playing really well, winning loads of games. Do you want to break that up at the risk that the new coach doesn't do as well? But I think, again, so I don't want to. I wouldn't want to live in a world where there is zero chance, because things happen. But at the same time, it has to be a really high bar. It can't be wins 5 or 6 games in a row, some of them in a basketball match type of way, and that's enough to become the permanent United manager. I think one thing we need to do as fans is push the bar high. No panic buying in the transfer window. No hiring managers that we just don't, where there's no guarantees with any manager. But the better the coach, the higher the experience, the more they've won at the highest level, I always feel the better the chance of being successful, right? Like in most things in life. So I think it's a really good thing for us to do. And as Man United fans, we need to hold our owners to account and push them towards better decisions, rather than, in my view, creating really low bars for them to jump over and then sort of celebrating a bang average panic buy signing, or winning 5 matches in a row suddenly makes you good enough to lead Man United. I think there has to be.
It makes you good enough to get a haircut.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's absolutely right.
No, I think just briefly on Man United, all I would say is that the fans are now even more intense to not just protest against the Glazers, but find out what this actual working relationship is between Ineos and the Glazers. And it just sort of shows you that when an owner doesn't speak, fans want them to speak, and they don't like the lack of engagement or transparency. But when an owner does speak and they say the manager's got 3 years and he lasts 3 months, then those words come back to haunt you. And then it becomes very, very silent when things are not going well. So naturally, as journalists, we're very balanced, and we try and report on what the project is and what the plans are, and the fact that Man United still think they can get Champions League football. And ultimately, the club's position, whether right or wrong, is very clear, that they're not just going to dive in and hire anybody. They're going to do a thorough process. And with that, that puts extra pressure on getting the right name in the summer. But it also buys them time, because if the club's position is there's no one we want right now, we don't want to rush it, then there's not much you can really say to contradict that until hindsight tells you whether they get the right name in the summer. And yet, as journalists, we're fully aware, and we also report that these Man United fans have been protesting against the Glazers long before Sir Jim Ratcliffe, and they've been waiting since Sir Jim Ratcliffe came in to control the football department to see what change. Is there more transparency? Is there more accountability? Are we going to break away from the repeated cycle of scapegoating and sacking managers? Is the club going to modernize? What on earth is going to happen with the debt? And even though we've seen some progress on the stadium, I can understand why a fan just looks at the chronology, because it's factual, and says, Ratcliffe comes in when a lot of fans wanted Qatar, again, whether rightly or wrongly. He takes sporting control, but the Glazers are still there. We don't know the long-term coexistence of the two. They hire Dan Ashworth, they get rid of Dan Ashworth. They promote Jason Wilcox. They were almost going to sack Eric Ten Hag. They win the FA Cup. They keep Eric Ten Hag. They sack Eric Ten Hag. They bring in Ruben Amorim mid-season. Ten Hag had a veto. They changed to head coach. Ruben Amorim ends saying he wants to be the manager, but he took a title as head coach. He never had a veto like Eric Ten Hag. There's a lot of inconsistencies there. So to calm everything down and stabilize the project and ultimately get some fans on board, at least with the Ineos part of the sporting project, this in recent history, even though we've probably said it for every hire, but my sense is this managerial appointment for Ineos anyway is their most important to date, because keeping and then U-turning on Eric Ten Hag wasn't a great look. And then obviously Ruben Amorim was all about forcing him to take it immediately, even though he wanted to delay. And that, coupled with Omar Barada, looked like two really smart, best-in-class hires. But in the context of Amorim, it hasn't worked. And now Manchester United's next decision for Ineos is their most important one, because if they can't get the project on track with this new manager, then the mood between fans and owners at the football club is going to sour even further.
Ben, yeah, we've already seen that, because now we're actually at a point where we're questioning things that are actually quite sensible. So, for instance, not buying players that are not part of the plan, not quite good enough, overpriced. It's like, just buy something, and I'm like, I understand that, and I'm not defending Ineos, but I don't think we should advocate for bad processes, behaviours, decisions that have partly led over the last 14 years, or 20 years really, to where we are now. But viewers, let us know. I know you've got to shoot, but I just wanted to touch on them really quickly if we've got enough time, Ben, around Gordon, Rodrygo, Arsenal, their pursuit of a left winger. Any updates from you regarding that? Just a few people
It's really more like summer, because obviously Trossard or Martinelli would likely have to depart and Noni Madueke can play on that side. Yildiz is the one really that I've heard Arsenal love. And it's just a case of what valuation is over the player's head, because right now it would be in excess of 100 million euros, if not 100 million pounds. Anthony Gordon was on Arsenal's list over the last 2 summer windows, but they never made a move. We know that in that summer window when Newcastle had PSR problems, it was actually Liverpool that came close to a deal there. So I don't think we can discount Arsenal considering Anthony Gordon, because he's been there on their list for quite some time. But let's see what Andrea Berta's perspective is, because the Gordon suggestion when he first came on the Arsenal radar was much more an Edu and Mikel Arteta idea. And I think Yildiz is the one that Andrea Berta really likes. Rodrygo, Arsenal love the player, but now Xabi Alonso's gone. We don't know whether he's even going to be prepared to leave. And the wage and the package is so high there that it's not going to change. So Arsenal were put off moving at a point when Rodrygo was at a low with the football club. He was being frozen out during the Club World Cup. All signs were that he wanted to leave. I can tell you more than one super agent had a mandate, even though they're not his direct agent, to go to different regions and find solutions and do early outreach with clubs and try and get a deal in place. And nothing came off. So it wouldn't remotely surprise me if Rodrygo waits and sees who is the Real Madrid manager in the summer and then decides if he wants to stay or go. So nothing to get too excited about yet as far as Arsenal and Rodrygo are concerned, even though the appreciation is there.
Which makes a lot of sense. And that's why I wanted to ask about Rodrygo, because with Alonso going, that feels like that whole situation can now change in that regard. Look, I want to thank everyone who's tuned into the show today, everyone who's hit the like button, everyone that has subscribed during the show. It's amazing. Thank you. We're live again today at 3:30 for Straight Facts, so make sure you're all back here with us for that live show as we look at some more of the transfer stories that are around. Plus, we preview and look ahead of a big Premier League weekend. Until next time, everybody, take care. Goodbye. God bless. And we're going to see you all soon. Bye-bye.